all of our military forces in the free world have been coming to grips with very difficult circumstances since the end of the Second World War. A lot of our operational circumstances have been characterised by these situations of dealing with non-state actors, very difficult situations of actually being able to identify the enemy in many circumstances. And I think that was particularly characteristic of situations like Vietnam, which added extra tension and stress for our members of the Defence Forces who returned and had ongoing and lingering problems afterwards that were not well understood. And it's very important for us to provide as much clarity as we can in those operational circumstances. But it is also important that we are very careful in the way that we structure our targeting processes and the way we use force and deploy force judiciously in counterinsurgency and stabilisation operations. Any time that you cause collateral civilian casualties, you will be potentially setting back your overall strategic mission. And so we operate obviously within the Australian Defence Force, and I speak as someone who was involved in the Defence Force for 30 years now, having just recently separated from the reserve. But in that time I can reassure the community and the House that the Australian Defence Force always operated at the upper end, the highest end and requirements of international law. And I will say, though, in addition to that, that in these circumstances, and bearing in mind the importance of discipline in targeting, that the Defence Force operates also well beyond the requirements of law in many circumstances as well, understanding the importance of the impact of their decisions and the use of force in general. And this legislation effectively takes into account a history and a tradition of those conflicts and the development of the law to try and catch up with those circumstances. So we've had, through the Geneva Conventions post-Second World War, the addition of Common Article 3, which dealt with non-international armed conflicts, but very inadequate in dealing with all the complexity. So beyond that time, we had the development of Additional Protocol 1, Additional Protocol 2 in particular, which deals with non-international armed conflicts in even more detail. And then, of course, we've seen the development of the Rome Statute that tried to codify all of this experience that in reality, in practical terms, and we had a body of law that was also evolved from the tribunal that dealt with the situation of the Bosnian conflict, trying to define these issues of members of organisations, what armed organisations were, and putting some definition around that. And really what this legislation is doing is acknowledging that in the circumstances that we're in Iraq, for example, you have an armed organisation where you have individuals who are not only providing direct support to combat activities, engaging in those combat activities, but what we, from a military background, would call combat support and combat services support. So that wrapped around the facilitation of military operations through, what we might have called engineering support in more professional circumstances, but also in the logistics of conducting these operations and attacks. And recognising that in Iraq we have a non-state organisation that effectively controls large amounts of territory and is able to operate close to the state-like capacities in controlling that territory, financial resources and ordnance and military resources. So this obviously poses a particular issue for our people who have to, if you like, deal with the definition of a proper target in those circumstances. And what we found was that the translation of what actually existed in international law was not effective in the way that the criminal code was developed in dealing with what we'd refined through the Rome Statute and state practice and experience. So this legislation effectively deals with that situation